Okay, here we go. Kinesiology 230. This is chapter 4, and we're talking biomechanics, and specifically, we're going to talk about types of movement and kinematics versus kinetics. There's going to be some nuance within this presentation, and you'll have to just kind of pay attention. Hopefully, I can describe these well enough for you. These are the areas that we'll be covering in the next 8 presentations, I believe it is. And the big takeaway we have is when we look at the human body and we look at functional anatomy, it's the study of how the body systems, everything in my body works to cooperate in a coordinated manner to do this, to make a presentation, to swing a baseball bat, to spike a volleyball, whatever that may be. It is a coordinated effort between all the functions of my body. And within biomechanics, it's the mechanical principles that relate to movement. And it's a little bit different, right, in terms of when you start talking about biomechanics versus functional anatomy. But just what you'll see in this chapter is a strong focus on the mechanical concepts and with a little bit of a touch to functional anatomy. So the way this kind of breaks out is there's a mountain of stuff to dig through, and you'll see these starting on page 42 and they go to 51. And we'll start off kind of pecking these off one by one from the top, going from mechanical terminology down through all the way mechanical movement and efficiency. And we'll break it out in a couple different presentations. So let's go ahead and try to take a couple bites here and then move on to the next presentation. So with this, mechanics, right, it's the branch of physics that deals with the effects of energy on bodies. And biomechanics, the term body refers to any collection of matter. And the book notes that it could be like the entire human organism itself, or it could be a specific limb that we're talking about. So you might be evaluating how somebody does a leg extension on a leg extension machine, and you're comparing the efficacy of one machine to the other, and you might be just focusing on one leg only. But in that type of study, you would view the one limb that's moving as the body that is moving at that point. But mechanics, you have two different types of movement. You have linear, which is very straight ahead, also referred to as rectilinear. And then you also have curvilinear, which is angular motion. You have an axis in the middle, and then you have this kind of point of rotation, and it's a fixed point that the body rotates around. So in a leg curl example, or sorry, leg extension example, the person is seated, the knee is the axis of rotation, and the lower leg, that being the tibia and the femur and the foot, are all coming forward and up to do the leg extension movement pattern. That would be a curvilinear movement pattern. Interestingly enough, a lot of our movement in the human body is comprised of joints, and those joints all have an axis of rotation, but the axis of rotation creates rotational force or torque, as we'll see, and that rotational force then translates into linear movement patterns. And it's a concept that's a little bit wonky to wrap yourself around, but you got to understand that many times to create linear movement, we have to have curvilinear movement within the body itself. And so we have three main planes. These are referred to as the cardinal planes. Now you have multiplanular type movement patterns that can move across plane and so forth. But for what we're talking about today in these presentations, we're talking about three main planes. You have frontal, which divides the body into front and back, hence the name frontal. Sagittal. Sagittal plane divides the body into right side and left side. So it kind of runs right down the nose. And then you have transverse plane, which cuts right across kind of horizontally here in the waistline. Now, this is not to say that the transverse plane is only at the belly button, or the sagittal plane only runs right through the nose, but the cardinal planes do, and you'll have variations of these. Like you might have a movement pattern where you're doing a bicep curl, and your bicep curl is done in sagittal plane, but you don't have your arms in line with your nose. That looks silly. So you can do movement patterns within the sagittal plane itself, but it might not be in one of the three cardinal planes per se, where you're right in line with the nose or the ears or the belly button in the midsection. So let's go back to kinematics and the difference between kinematics and also kinetics. Kinematics is a study of movement without regard to the underlying forces, right? So it's just how the body moves. We're not too worried about things like power, torque, or work performed. That's another domain. That's kinetics. So you have five main variables within kinematics. That's timing. That's going to be the position or location of the body, the displacement, the velocity, and the acceleration. On the other side of this, we're looking at kinetics, which is over here, And it's a study of movement with respect to the forces involved, and it could be the forces produced, work performed, the power or the torque involved with the movement pattern. So the book does a really good job of kind of taking this really complex process here, and it does a good job of kind of narrowing it down in this passage. Forces can be thought of as the causes of motion. Human movement happens as a result of mechanical factors that produce and control movement from the inside, which are the internal forces, such as muscle force, and or affect the body from the outside, which are external forces. So you have these two main concepts of internal versus external force. And when you start talking about working out and fitness, you have the internal forces, which are the muscles moving the bar, but the bar itself is being affected by gravity, and so too are the limbs. Don't get me wrong, when you do a bicep curl, your forearm has mass to it, and you have to curl your forearm up, but that's usually pretty negligible. But just keep in mind that those are your two main kind of forces that are acting upon the body, where you'll have internal and external. So I'm going to break from this. I'm going to move on to the next one. When you look at forces, just again, wrap yourself around internal, external forces, and you start to think of this in terms of how you can evaluate movement. Moving on, guys.